Hey guys, lots of crazy stuff happening in the world. Masks are being mandated. Other regulations are also upon us. So if you need a break from the craziness, stay with me and we can talk a little bit science, more specifically brain and cellular frequencies. And then after this, we can all go back to the craziness. So if you remember last time we talked about the reptilian brain, I also briefly touched upon the empathetic brain as well as the logical or analytical brain. And we also talked briefly about some of those frequencies. But today, I want to talk about something totally different that is really not different after all. And it is something that I call the neuro photons. The reason I want to talk about it is because information is extremely powerful. It can absolutely control us. It can also trigger such that we go from reptilian brain to the empathetic brain to the logical brain, not to mention all the frequency changes and shifts that happen. A lot of you ask about question about mind control and the future of some of the theories that are out there in terms of powers that be controlling our minds. As we also talked about last time, I think we should be more worried about the way in which we are triggered and manipulated today, because regardless, whatever information that comes through your senses, that controls you. Now, the next question is, what is information at a cellular level? That's a question I've been asking myself for I don't know how many years, and that is also partly why I dedicated my own thesis towards information science. Essentially, I did a mashup of several different disciplines, one of them neuroscience, more specifically the science of frequencies, e.g. data collection, cognitive sciences, information search processes, and also information science. And for my postdoc, I'm adding the quantum physics to it as well, because I am looking into potentially the electrical aspect of the brain cells as well as the cellular cells, to be honest. While we're still seeking to answer the question what information exactly is, and by the way, I haven't seen many papers or scientists actually even ask that question, because most of us are very busy with just still looking at and observing and researching the way in which the body is triggered, the way in which the brain is triggered, and then we observe those behaviors, be it on animals or be it on humans. I never did animals, by the way. That's gross, but I did it on humans with their consent form, by the way. And so for us to be able to just trigger certain things and then see how they react to it. Basically, most of our science today is at that level. We're still ways to go in terms of understanding what is it that exactly is happening in the brain. For my own thesis, when I was doing it, which took about 6+ years, I was interested in terms of knowing how going from the reptilian brain to the empathetical brain and to the triggering it to the analytical brain, how is it that we process information? And when I say process, I don't like that word, to be honest. I know that it's used a lot, but because I am more into the frequency of the brain, I don't think there is no process. There is an exchange of reception and emanation, if that's a word, of frequencies, but there is no processing per se. But that is basically what I'm doing. And I know that a lot of your traditional neuroscientists are still discussing things at a traditional level. But I think that it's time for us to sort of move towards the next level. And so that is where we're at. We're just looking at what we observe when there is a trigger of some sort towards a brain cell or a human cell and what the reaction is, and then we collect data, and then we analyze it, and then we come up with findings. For my particular thesis, I triggered their emotions through visual stimuli, and then I had them go through certain tasks of looking for information, searching for information, and I then analyze their behavior, reactions in terms of various different ways in terms of their reactions. I don't want to go into it too much because it's almost 200 pages, but I just want to give you the gist of it and as an introduction to what I'm about. Now, that is at the physical level for the brain. Let's now go to the non-physical or the frequency level of the brain. So we already talked about how we create these frequencies through electricity, and also we touched upon it a little bit in terms of some of the frequencies. I still have to do other videos in terms of the exact frequencies. But essentially, if we go back to the core of everything, you are electricity. There is no doubt about it. There is no way that we can sort of negate that, because we've done enough of studies to determine that at a very atomic level, we're all electricity, because we are creating electricity as we speak. As you sit there right now, you are creating electricity. Now, if you remember your science classes, electricity at its core is a dance of electrons within the atoms. If you want to know more about it, please study Maxwell and Tesla and all these amazing scientists who discovered a lot of groundwork of what we know today, and a lot of sciences that are being built today. But at a core level, it is what we're doing, and it doesn't matter whether it's in your brain and whether it's in your cells, body cells, because we know the result of it, because we can measure the electromagnetic waves and electrical waves through EEG of the brain cells, but also of the cellular cells, and that is how we know that we are creating electricity, and also through EMFs, of course. Now, let's look at just one of your cells. If you remember again your science classes, your cell is freaking amazing. It's just a world of miracle, in my opinion. And just one cell, at least the current science has counted, is made up of approximately 100 trillion atoms. And if you think about it, each atom is made up of electrons and protons and all those good stuff. And the dance between these atoms and the way in which they change position emanates this electricity. So you can imagine, and not just one cell. Now, if you look at all of the cells in the body, scientists have also approximately counted all the cells in one human body to also 100 trillion. So 100 trillion times 100 trillion, I have no idea. My mind is blown away, but you do the math. Essentially, that is why we say that we create electricity, because when it comes to the brain, we're really able to measure through EEG these brain waves. And if you have ever seen videos of it or pictures of it, you know what I'm talking about. So this is not a made up science. There is, like, fortunately, we actually have proof of it, where way back when they were all at a theoretical level, but these are the scientists who received those messages and were able to communicate it to us, although they could not measure it. Now, if you've ever been exposed to quantum physics, I'm sure you've heard of photons. Photons are basically, they are a particle of atoms, and they represent one of the representations is light. And at the quantum physics level, you cannot explain atoms and electricity if you don't bring in the science of photons in it. It is that essential to the whole aspect of it, the way in which we look at how electricity moves, how it behaves, the speed it has, and all those characteristics that it possesses. Obviously, after Einstein and of course Maxwell and all those, they were able to translate. Now that we've looked at the massiveness, if that's a word, of this whole system, including the brain waves, or I mean the brain neurons, as well as your cells, let's look at how the information is transferred. Now, traditionally, we have been told that the brain processes information and it has something called memory and it stores something. But none of the science that we have today, although they want to tell us that that's what they believe, has been able to prove that there is a specific part within the brain where there's a storage. Mainly what they talk about is that, oh, there is a memory and memory is everywhere. But when you look at it at a frequency level, when you look at it at an electrical level, and when you look at it at a quantum level, then memory becomes something totally different. Memory does not become like a storage place where you put stuff in it. In fact, at a frequency level, it becomes an exchange of these electrical waves, of these brain waves, of this photons that I call them neuro photons. And you won't be able to read these stuff in most of the papers because there is a war between your traditional neuroscientists and the new ones that are coming up, and I'm one of the new movements, is that they really want to stick to the way in which the brain is at a physical level. And there's nothing wrong with that because they use fMRI machines to measure the glucose and the oxygen level of the brain, and that's amazing. But that was the first step. We're ready to go to the next step. And the next step is at the so-called frequency level. And that is why we are studying and we're focusing more on the frequencies. So if you end up reading traditional papers for neuroscience, you will end up reading a lot of those type of papers, which is great because those are the groundwork. But then we're also evolving towards looking at, for example, the EMFs, which is pretty hard to measure today because we are so surrounded by so much EMF around. You really need a badass lab to go in and measure that, and those signals are very weak. But nonetheless, we're able to look at the EEG. And so that ties back into the information that I was talking about earlier and how important it is because it is traveling through the space towards you. And as a result, you grab it through your senses and it travels through, again, frequencies to your brain, and also the brain decodes it. Now, all that sounds great, but we still don't know how the heck it does that. And when you look at it at a physical level, you're not able to really go in depth with it. But when you look at it at a very frequency and quantum physics level, you will be able to detect a whole new world. And that is when information takes up a whole new meaning when you go into the world of frequency and try to define it that way. And that is partly what I focused a lot on for my thesis, but also for my postdoctoral, working on that as well, mainly at this point anecdotal. So let's tie all of these back into why information is so influential for us. So as you already know, and we already talked, all this information, you soak it in through your senses, visual, whatever, and then through these, if you read about it in details, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It basically travels magically into your brain and whatnot. But what it does is that it is able to shift your already established frequencies to whatever the information wants you to shift to. So let's say that you are in a neutral state of emotional state, and then you happen to see a picture that is extremely disturbing to you. Immediately that shifts your frequencies. And that is partly what I was able to do for my dissertation. And I ran 48 participants, which is a whole lot of participants, subject, I should say. Usually for dissertations, they are at top 20. I went 48, but there's a reason I chose that number, because there's a way in which I wanted to make these order, because I had a lot of treatment and a lot of things that I was triggering within the subject. So, but what I'm trying to say is that any type of information that you receive has the amazing influence to shift your frequencies such that you can go from empathetic brain into reptilian brain into logical brain. And that's why, and as a result, you react. And so that's why a lot of images could potentially be very, very mind controlling, if you will, if you want to call it that, that impacts our. A perfect example is the way in which we see the world unfold throughout all these regulations and all these crazy stuff that are happening around the world right now. And you can easily see it within yourself, but also within your community and your environment, how these sometimes very disturbing information trigger us. And you're also able to see how it triggers other people on social media. I'm starting to call the social media the landmine, by the way, because it really feels like a landmine. I had an episode the other day, and I'm sure some of you remember, there was this politician who, at that point I was like, he's at his reptilian brain. He pretty much, took what I wrote out of context and then chopped my head off like a reptile, and really didn't think about the consequences, and also really didn't do his job in terms of looking at who is this person who's actually saying this, because I was genuinely talking about my own personal experience at college. And apparently I found out afterwards that this was an exactly thing that in his campaign he was working against. And so I was a very, very easy prey. But those of you who know me, I don't let anybody manipulate me like that. I don't care how kind I am. If you want to pull me into your stuff and shit, I'm not gonna let you do that. So I ended up blocking several of them. But what I'm trying to say is that it was very obvious that at that moment there was no critical thinking about ramification. It was all reptilian. And so you can tell the power that not only visual, but in this case just words had, because apparently the words that I used hit a spot. And I was surprised a little bit, just because my followings and my community, I should say, or my connections, I should say, that's a better word, is really not that big. I mean, my audience on YouTube also is not that big. I don't even get that many hits. So I knew that they did these stuff together, but I thought it was more among themselves, among politicians. I had no idea they actually do it with, innocent citizens who was just expressing an experience. Nonetheless, the way in which the whole thing unfolded clearly showed that it was a lot about action and reaction. Me, it's my agenda, and I don't care who it is, which goes back to the reptilian brain that we actually talked about last time. And so for that reason, it's very important to remember and know why information is so powerful over us, and why we need to be very careful in terms of making sure that when we are presented with an information, or when we present information, that what part of the system, this whole system, is it actually triggering? Now, whatever your fight is, because I know that a lot of us have a mission, especially during this time of 2020, we have mission and we have a fight that we want to do, and that's great. I think amazing, that's laudable, we all should do it. But at the same time, being aware of it, whatever the fight is, whether we go out to protest or whether we're just typing stuff like I do, it's still important to think of it in those terms, which then brings me back to how information is exchanged, and absolutely through waves. I want to go deeper into it, but I need to finish writing about it, because it's happened in the past that I talk about it and people unfortunately copy it and then they present it as their own. But the neuro photons, I'm pretty sure you've never heard of it, but it is a way in which if you want to think about information exchange at the quantum level, is the theory that I am defending, that I'm proposing and defending based on my own research and other people's research. And that is where things become extremely interesting, because not only are we able to explain how everything works at the physical level, but we're also able to explain how things work at a quantum physics level, frequency level, electricity level, if you will, and also potentially at a holographic level. Those of you who know me know that I am also interested in holographic mind. So that is also part of what I'm trying to bring into this whole soup that I'm cooking. All right. I do want to go in much more details with you, because I'm super excited about it, but I also want to make sure that the videos are short, and also I want to make sure that I write about it. So I hope this was helpful to you guys. Thanks for watching, and love you all. Take care. Bye.